Bagseed Chronicles is a podcast about cannabis and the people who enjoy it. I hope to provide commentary about cannabis cultivation, cannabis enjoyment, cannabis as an herbal remedy, and hopefully continued cannabis liberation. Now join me, Uncle Dig, and let's overgrow the world. Hey there! Hey, welcome back to the Bagseed Chronicles. This is Uncle Dig, and we've got kind of a nice show for you today. So I'm going to go over a garden update, and I'm going to interview my long-time growmie, Roll and Smokes. Uncle Dig's garden update. Hey guys, the past week it's been very rainy in the garden, so I haven't been doing as much as I normally do because rain kind of disrupts. As far as IPM in the last week, I have let ladybugs out, so at least since we talked, and I've only found a couple of aphids since. The ladybugs have stuck around on the plants too. I have seen 0 thrips since I let these ladies go. I'm still using mechanical means to battle cucumber beetles, i.e., I am finding them and I am smashing them. On to the photo period part of the garden. Black Domina, both plants are doing well. The one that wasn't too damaged by chickens was getting a small amount of LST, just spreading out as they grow to make them spread out wider so more lights get to the center. So they'll grow more bushy. I'm doing that with all my plants that have had their second top. The 2 Star Killer plants are big. One will be topped a third and final time soon. They don't like extra fertilizer. They seem to like the mixture they're in and not much extra. They clawed up a little bit when I gave them some nitrogen last week. The Strawberry Dream Bagseed is doing well. It has been topped twice and smells good already. The Alien OG is a little bit behind the other photo periods and has only been topped once, but it's a younger plant, so that makes sense. It will probably get its second top within a couple of weeks, though, as it heats up again and everyone starts busting out again. Now, the 2 CBD Dutch treats in the 30-gallon pots are doing well. They have been topped twice as well. I ended up putting the CBD Dutch treat plant that I had planning on giving away into a 20-gallon fabric pot, and I put it into a tomato cage. We'll see what she does. It turns out that sometimes these plants are actually hard to give away. So, now as far as all the plants, I did go under there and clean up the bottoms again, just to kind of get rid of the leaves that look like they were going to dip in the dirt. I'm trying, even when they're wet, I don't want any of the leaf surface to touch the soil or whatever medium the plant is growing in. It's just a recipe for mold and other kind of nastiness. But anyway, moving on to the other part of the garden, let's talk about the autoflowers, right? The 2 Tangerine Dream are flowering. Can you believe it? It's June and they're flowering. I'm so excited. Autoflowers are so weird. I am excited to see if I really end up harvesting some flowers in July. That would be really cool because I'm almost at a home grow. And I feel like smoking your own home grow has an extra magical quality that bought weed doesn't. And it's also good medicine, and I feel like I do a better job than some of the mass growers because I think I put a little more care into the plants. The Afghan mass is starting to take off but are not flowering yet, and same with the candy cane. Now, into my vegetable garden. I'm super excited. My peas are very tall, and I think that I'll be harvesting my first pods next week. My peppers are doing well, and I will start harvesting super chilies soon. The jalapenos and serranos are both flowering, and I thinned the tomatillo seedlings, and my sunflowers are about 18 inches tall. So everything's moving right along, and that's it for the garden update. Let's overgrow the world. Roland Smokes is a medical grower, former transporter, and veteran. He has been involved in the cannabis scene in Southern Oregon for 11 years and is a Southern Oregon OG. He is also a dear friend and my first and oldest growmie, at least when it comes to cannabis. We went to each other's weddings and shit. Welcome to Bagseed Chronicles. Roland Smokes, how have you been?
Excellent. Today is a great day.
It is a beautiful day. We're getting a little rain down here, which is much needed, and I'm glad we get a little bit more before it's going to shut off.
Oh, it'll help everybody. Everybody's lacking the water this year for the crops, so it's really nice to see.
Oh, yeah, especially out in Klamath. It's going to be really bad this year.
Yeah.
So, but let's get on to happier things. So, I've known you for, almost 9 years now, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, right about there.
And how long have you been consuming cannabis? I assume much longer than I have.
I've been consuming cannabis. Was turned on to me by a girlfriend of mine when I was like 12. And it was more, she turned it on to me. I was having medical issues then, of stomach issues, and it seemed to stop the ulcers that I was having in my stomach. So I really loved cannabis. It's like been my best friend since then.
And what year was that?
Oh, that was 1977.
See, so true OG. That's a long time to have a relationship with the plant. Now I understand you were involved in transporting the plant from here to there for quite a while, hence the nom de guerre. But when did you start transporting cannabis, and when did you kind of get out of the game completely?
I started in 2015 on not such a legit level, but then in 2016 I went to medical and I started transporting we created a business at that time. 3 of us did. Actually, 2 other people already developed it. They brought me into it to be part of the delivery system to get it up to Portland. So we created a pipeline of sun-grown to the ingrown Portland.
So I know that a lot of people think they know what sun-grown cannabis is, and if you haven't had it from this part of the world grown outdoors, you really haven't had sun-grown that does the plant true justice. If you ever have a chance to smoke some Northern California, or specifically very, very Northern California, very Southern Oregon bud, you're in for a treat.
Oh, definitely.
So how long have you been growing the plant?
Growing for about 11 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and developed my own styles over time. Everybody has their own way. You listen. But mainly the thing I can stress to anybody trying it new, definitely go for the organic way, just for your own safety and your own body.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I do use some synthetic inputs, but I don't use them very often or very much, and I think that if you're going to use them, you should use them sparingly.
Oh, definitely, if you have to.
Have you grown in different areas of the valley here? When we're talking about the valley, we're talking about the Rogue Valley, that general area from about Ashland all the way up to the mountains north of Grants Pass, for anyone who's curious about the area we're talking about.
I myself personally have only grown in a couple of spots.
Okay.
I've grown out in the famous Williams area.
Okay.
I've grown in the hills of Galice, and I've grown in Merlin. However, though, I have known personal growers in all areas of this valley, up to Eugene and into Portland, into Bend. I know many growers that have grown on many different levels.
Okay. So you've grown in Galice, you've grown in Merlin. I would assume that Galice and Merlin were more similar growing conditions than out in Williams. Is that true, or am I wrong?
No, actually, Galice was way different out of Merlin and Williams. Williams is more like Merlin.
Oh, okay.
But Galice is because the hills and there's not as much sunlight as there is in Merlin and Williams. So it creates a different way of growing. Your plants kind of get stunted from not having as much sunlight.
Yeah.
There's more moisture down there because of you're not out in the flatlands of Williams or Merlin, so you got a lot more moisture, so you're not watering as much either. There's a lot of different variants. You got to keep an eye on your plant because the heat still is there, but you have the humidity that your plant might not be used to out in Galice.
Okay, that's interesting. That's not something I would have assumed, and that's something to to bring up every part of the country down to 200 miles here, 200 miles there, 50 miles here, 50 miles there, can have a completely different grow requirement. If it's a little drier, the relative humidity is higher. So you really want to pay attention to your own climate, because that's going to affect what you do and when you do it.
Oh, definitely.
So we talked about the area difference. What kind of genetics did you get 11 years ago versus what kind of access you have now? And what have you stuck with, and what have you kind of let go or moved on from?
Well, it's real funny. You think 11 years ago, we were toying with the thought that we could genetically do this. There really wasn't any scientific backing on it that much. And then it started coming more forth. More people in the science industry were interested and wanted to do stuff. So they started genetically coding it and finding out phenotypes. But 11 years ago, you'd ask somebody, hey man, you got some OG that I can grow? Maybe some purple kush? I mean, there wasn't that much going on. And there was a few people I know in the valley that were actually ahead of their time, started doing stuff. Gentleman I worked with, he was right on top of it. He created like Nice Cherry and Bubba Skunk. I mean, that was his genetics that he changed. That was the first time I seen somebody take and actually crossbreed and do some pollination and create their own strains, which was really cool.
And of course now it seems like everybody who's been growing for 6 years has done a couple crosses. I mean, I don't know if that's the way I'm going to go, but I think a lot of people at least experiment so they can make their own seeds. So here's what I'll ask. Compared to the back then versus now, is there anything that the plant seems like a lot of the genetics you see seem to lack that they used to have?
Well, the funny thing that you've pretty much lost, and it's in a lot of names, is Kush. Kush was a very different taste and flavor plant. Even the leaves, everything was totally different than what it is now. The leaves seem to be more narrow, not quite as wide as they were back then. I mean, the genetics, but on the flip side of all that, the genetics has made some awesome plants now compared to then. The THC content is more. You can get more of the blend of the THC and CBD combination coming out of a plant now. I mean, they've come a long ways. So I look at it, back then was great, but now it's superior.
So this whole 11 years you've been doing it either medically or in some form of some like gray market legal sense. You haven't been like full outlaw grow. So like, how is that correct?
Well, in 11 years actually before it became medical, I was outlaw.
Oh, okay.
I was like ninja in the woods.
Oh, okay.
Hence Galeese.
Oh, okay. So that's where we'll have to talk about Galeese. We'll have to do a whole thing about Galeese one day. Well, I'll bring you back and we'll talk about your Galeese days, because I'm sure that could take up a whole interview in itself.
Yes.
And I want to know about the mechanics of some of those old BLM grows. I want someone to tell me how they used to get all the water out there.
That's the trick.
I bet. So how did you deal when you were doing medical the last 11 years? Was there as much a law enforcement concern, or did they leave the small-scale medical growers alone?
It took the law enforcement to actually go on to legal grows, assuming they were illegal, many times to finally realize, hey, we can't just be busting people because we think they're growing illegal. We got to do some checking. It was pretty ignorant on their behalf, and I'm not putting down our law enforcement. I'm just saying it was pretty ignorant in the beginning. But now they're onto it. They understand the whole concept of the legalities, and it's really good for all of us involved. I think it's even a safer model for us.
So before the culture kind of changed, they would kind of come on and just chop your plants and bust you without really asking if you were medical first?
Yeah.
Well, that's not cool. I'm glad they stopped doing that, because
Yes.
we'd all be ass out if they started doing that. So law enforcement was a concern early on, and then later not so much. Now, I knew that when I was starting to work with you a little bit, hang out and work with the plants a little bit, you had some problems with rippers intermittently, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
And that's a whole nother thing. That always seemed to be more the concern at least 5 to 8 years ago.
Correct.
Rippers were really bad because it was transferring from medical where not a lot of people had it. So not a lot of people still had it growing. Right. So people would target people for ripping them off. And there was this one semi-famous case. I don't remember what town he was out of. That old guy that got beat up and tied up by a group of rippers from out of town, back east. and they took his whole crop, and it was a big deal. But little shit like that's been going on for years.
Well, actually, that was a little more than that. It was actually out in Selma.
Okay.
And it was some people out of Crescent City, and they ended up killing the old guy.
Oh, geez.
Over pot, if you can believe that. Over pot. That's so ridiculous. And they didn't get that much, but they were able to catch him. And the thing about that is that's right now. I have a rec farm next to me.
Yeah.
And somebody broke into their place, but people don't understand. These rec farmers have to be state legal, which means they have cameras all over the place. So in order to do that, you have to be camouflaged out to the max and look like a ninja. And that's pretty much what these guys looked like when they came into his place. They came in, they kind of thought they knew where they were taking. They took 200 pounds of his moldy pot. Yay! But so they didn't really score. But the point is, they're still out there.
Yeah, okay. So they're just targeting larger operations to make it worth the charges they might get if they get caught.
Oh, definitely.
Because now as a legal grower, people have begun to start press charges when they find out who broke into their shit. So it's not like back in the day where you were just like, well, fuck, I guess they just took half my crop the other night when I went to the coast, and now I'm fucked. Now it's like you call the cops, and sometimes, I mean, not often, but sometimes you get some of your crop back. Yeah,
and the cool thing is as a legal grower now, you have a bite. You can actually use law enforcement to help you now.
It's a trip. It's really a trip, and I'm sure we're still not a priority. And like our county sheriff just flew a helicopter around taking pictures of like lottie-dottie everybody's big grow, regardless of whether it was kosher or not, and just put everybody on blast. And so a lot of people are angry at them.
Oh yeah, because now they showed them where their farms are. You definitely, we live in a valley, but unless you're really seeking it out or in the air, you won't see most of these grows. They're hidden very well. True growers will make it so you don't even know they're growing.
Now, there's some really loud hemp growers, but that's hemp.
Correct. Hemp is more loud than anybody else. The THC growers, you won't know them unless they want you to know them. I mean, I know a lot just because I went from medical into seeing rec, and I know a lot of those guys, and I know where they're at and stuff, but I don't just go pop in and visit them.
No, you call first, man.
Yeah, you got to call. These guys are all still reaping the old PTSD from the latter days. We're just, we're still in that mode.
So, as it went from illegal to medical to fully recreational, as far as the people involved with the plant, like who was growing it and involved with it when it was illegal? First of all, what were the type of people? Like, we assume, like, a lot of people would make the assumption that it was a criminal element. I'm sure that was part of it, but I've also heard that local yokels, for lack of a better word, were able to make a living off the plant without getting in too deep in certain segments. That was kind of a thing, right?
There is definitely a culture of that, and these people still are living that culture, most of them, and they're doing it more of a legal way on their growing instead of the illegal grows, the outdoor ninja grows, as I call them. But they're using what's legal now to actually make their way still, even though the price has dropped tremendously from those days. Because when they were doing it illegal, the price was up. And they made themselves enough to where they have established themselves in their communities where they're either doing businesses or they're actually buying real estate. I mean, it's amazing what these people have done for themselves out of something that was illegal now is legal.
Okay, so people talk about what the price used to be. So when I first started coming out to you, people were still getting like anywhere from $1,600 to $2,000 a pound.
True.
And depending on who you were and whether you were selling to a dispensary or whatever, some people were getting north of $3,000 a pound, correct?
Correct.
For the top shelf, like the best outdoor.
Oh, yeah. So
now I've seen pretty good weed for $300 a pound wholesale. What are you seeing?
Yep. Really, I've seen the prices up to $800, but that's special. I don't know how special. I haven't seen that kind of special. But generally, right now, you're correct. Anywhere from 3 to 5 is about a general rule of thumb.
Which on a small scale, isn't worth it as a black market grower to blow up your backyard. It's really not.
Well, see, the black market growers that are blowing it up aren't selling it here. They're selling it in other states where it still isn't legal, and they're still getting that top dollar up to
Oh,
2,500.
so no one even sees that. It just goes back
No, it
east.
just vanishes.
Okay.
So that's a total different. That's what I'm saying. There's still those, let's say, old school entrepreneurs still doing that.
So and then you've got guys like me that are kind of stuck in the medical way. I grow my plants, I hoard a bunch of weed, I smoke it all. Maybe I give it to some friends, and then that's it. That's my game. That's it. And then you've got other people that went full rec, and they are corporate. And you actually worked a little bit in that scene too, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
Well, tell me about the medical scene first, because the medical scene is dear to my heart. When I came into it, it was a very kind of special time and place. It felt like
It was. Medical was probably. I wish in some ways, Oregon would have never gone rec. If we would have kept it medical, I think we would have had such a better. Not so many people getting angry because people are growing such huge crops. Number one. Number two, medical was simple. There wasn't so many things you had to do like you do rec right now. You've got so many hoops you got to jump through. It isn't funny. Medical, that was easy to get. You could transfer it. Not a problem. Now you got to put it on your computer if you're rec. If you're going to give, transfer it. It's got to be all digitally. Medical wasn't there. Towards the end of medical, it started being where it was going, how it was doing. The industry I was doing in transporting kind of led up to how the rec market transports now. We were so transparent in our business. We were the first role model in Oregon to be transporting medical interstate. And I mean in-state, not interstate, but in-state. And it never happened before. And we were doing it on a big level. And the state was watching us under a microscope. But they knew we were doing everything legal. So I think they used a lot of our transparency for their blueprint for the rec, which led us into developing some laws there and stuff that we had already started to try to write for medical, which was awesome.
Can you say what company you worked for?
I've worked for a couple different companies. The one I was working with specifically was Slipstream.
Okay.
And we were a subsidiary of a great company, CO2.
Okay.
And they are awesome people. They have great products. And I would still, I mean, when I retire, I'm going to go back to work for them probably.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So a place you definitely like to go back to.
Oh, yeah. Good people, good things, good vibes.
And so that medical, I would say that the rec, that people's market, entrepreneurial market still exists. Now, the medical scene has been diminished, but I think it still exists on some level. Like, you've definitely got people still like growing back in backyards like me, and other people that are growing at kind of a medium scale that are doing it for themselves and a small group of friends. But that's kind of a smaller and smaller scene, it seems like, every year.
Well, the thing about it is people don't realize medical, if you're grandfathered in when you were in the medical scene big,
yeah.
Which means if you're grandfathered in, you could still be growing 96 plants.
Oh, well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and you could be on a smaller scale and still be growing 48 plants. But you'd have to have been grandfathered in for that. Right now, I think medical's right at the max is 24 if you have cards.
So I think so as I understand, I looked into it and I said, no, fuck that. So I've got one card,
right,
and then I've got my wife's 4 bonus rec, and that's all I've got. If I were to take on one more card, because I'm not grandfathered in, if I take on one more card and go up to 12 plants, I think I've got to report to Metric.
Yeah, you do.
Which is insane for 2 cards. It's a husband and wife medical card. Now I got to report to Metric.
It is insane. But what they're trying to do is trying to eliminate the black market of the medical. But yeah, and it's kind of funny because you got to think about this. Medical is you're usually growing for somebody else, and you give them a pound and a half is what your deal is.
Yeah.
And any of us that have grown knows that's kind of a little skimpy, but
depending on how big you're going,
right.
That's almost the whole plant in my 30 gallons.
Right.
But in the ground out here, that could be a fifth of a plant.
Right. Right. So I'm saying, and you're growing 6 of them. So what has happened though is rec on those bigger medical grows now. Rec is opened up. You can test and you can sell your medical on the rec market now. You just got to find dispensaries that'll move it for you.
Yeah, and that's the big challenge. And I looked into that too. If I did take on another card and I went to 12 and I decided to transfer my excess to a dispensary, I looked at what I would make versus my administrative cost on that small of a scale, and I would not have even made $3,000, and it wouldn't have been worth it.
Right.
It wouldn't have been worth it. So that's another thing that people like say, well, just go medical and do all the paperwork and go for it and then sell to dispensaries. Dude, if you're doing it yourself, it's not worth it. It's so much work. Because once you go from, like, let's say your four rec plants that you're focusing on to any more than that, I feel like the more plants you add to a grow, the more complicated it can get, especially if you're working different phenotypes. Then it can get really, like, if you're working on, like, you know, if you pop seeds, you've got 6, like I've got 8 individual photo periods out here that each need their own special attention. Yep. They're each going to behave differently. Like, one of them doesn't like nitrogen fertilizer at all. The other one can't get enough. They vary. And so the more plants you get like that, the more different it can become. And there's ways to eliminate that, but I like seeds.
Yeah. Growing from seed always does that. And that's what I'm saying, the pheno. The more you get the stronger phenotype, this is what I'm saying, the person I started working with, he developed his phenotypes. And the stronger your phenotypes are, the less chance you have of that variance. Yeah. You keep the same plant doing the strain, which is awesome, off a seed.
See, and I've noticed that, like, so this is the first time I've bought genetics, and I will say that, like, the difference between the plants is way less from this seed company than it was from my bag seeds I was popping. They'd be way different. But this company, like, they're different. Like, each one will have deeper ridges on the leaves, and one will be like this, but they'll all have the same general shape when I train them, if they're from the same seed pack. And I've noticed that some of the wilder strains are a little less the same, like less stable. True. But some of the more, like, tried and true strains that have been around a long time, I'll pop 3 seeds, and 3 of the plants will look pretty similar. They'll be slightly different, but they'll be pretty similar, which is really cool that they've been able to do that. So now let's talk about the recreational market. What were those folks like? I know you only interacted with them for a little bit.
Rec opened us up to huge grows. And the biggest thing about rec was learning how to get all that grow cut, trimmed up, and brought into the dispensary and drying. Nobody had ever done it on that scale. So it was all a learning process. And what's amazing is the people that started in the beginning were big medical already, but they went like, probably 50 times the size they were. And they had to think that large, and it was a learning process. Everybody for the first rec year they got schooled. The plant schooled them. I have to tell you that. The plant schooled everybody because there was more involved that they weren't expecting. Like the size of the dry rooms. Like how are we gonna trim up 200 pounds of pot in a week? I mean, that kind of stuff. They had to go learn, get schooled, realize things were different level. All of a sudden they needed more people than ever before.
That was the year of the Uber trimming. I remember those first rec years. Because people used to, so what you don't, people call them trimmigrants. There's people, basically like dreaded hippies and people that come almost like a working vacation out to the hills every October to trim weed. And back in the day, they used to pay ludicrous amounts of money for every pound you would trim, like $200 a pound. Well, they would trickle in, but then rec came and they had one more big trimming year where thousands of people came into the valleys of the West Coast to trim weeds. And now that flood of people has kind of calmed down a little bit over the past years.
It's definitely calmed down because the legality of it was that now you had to show these people had to have permits to work in a rec market. And you got to pay $100 to get that permit.
I've got it.
And some of these people coming didn't realize that. So that put them out because they didn't have the $100. They figured they could just trim and make a living again. And it actually made it more legit because they started paying hourly. They had to take out taxes. I mean, so it went from that great $200 a pound as he's talking down to like starting out at $15 an hour.
To trim weed. Which if you're trimming someone else's weed and they're not like sweetening the deal with a sack, $15 an hour is a hard sell for me to trim weed. Like if they're not letting me keep smalls at least.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's really hard. So, you get good trimmers. You tell them 15, you'll bump them. And what you do, as soon as you get a good trimmer, you bump them instantly to 20 so you can keep them. And even then, they're like, man, I used to make this. And we're like, yep, that was then, this is now.
Yep. And I know a lot of the farm work pays more like farm work pays nowadays than it ever did before. So the people that are still working with the plant are either limited to that industry for whatever reason, whether it's personality or just the level of consumption they have, or they love the plant that much that they're willing to work with it for the wages that a farm worker gets paid, which I don't know if you know anything about agricultural work in this country, but we don't pay our farm workers enough.
No, not at all.
So we've kind of covered its journey from, cowboy to corporate and how that's changed the scene. Overall, what would you say your favorite thing about the modern, way of weed is, and what's your least favorite?
My favorite is, guess what? Anybody can stop in a shop and get your choice. You get a pick now. I mean, you get silver. You can get a cartridge for your vape. You can get some shatter if you want. You can get some hash if you want. You can get some edibles if you want. You can get a joint if you want. And you can get raw bud. And you can choose what you want. They have CBD now. They have, it's like going into, a whiskey shop. You got all these variants you can have and all these different flavors. And that's the bonus. The downside is that is manufactured weed. That is just totally, going out and just busting it to get it out so you can get it in the shop. That isn't boutique. And that's the downfall.
So, yeah, I will say most dispensary weed is just not as good. There's something about hand-trimmed, weed grown with whatever level of love the person growing it has that other weed doesn't. And I will say that there's just a level of care that you're taking if you're doing it on a smaller scale with the branches and stuff that you're just not taking if you're doing it on a huge scale. If you've got a buck 5 plants that are only 6 feet tall, you take your time. If you've got a buck, 20, 30, 40, 50 in a day, you're not taking that much time with it.
No. So that's the downside.
So it's been great to have you on the Bagseed Chronicles, and I know there's this strain that you've been growing for a few years called Jaeger. Do you know where I can talk to someone about that specific strain and where it came from?
The original strain came from Miller, and it's out in CJ. And
CJ?
Yeah, Cave Junction.
Cave Junction, okay.
Yeah, actually probably a little beyond Cave Junction. The Millers, they have their ranch, they have a website, and that's theirs. And everybody says they have the Miller cut, and most of them might have some form of it. But until you really have some of theirs and then you actually been able to try somebody else's, you'll see the big difference. They really got the genetics marketed on that brand. And we don't call it Jaeger anymore. Everybody pretty much calls it Purple Hindu Kush.
Right. Because
that's kind of part of it. And then there's another part that was made to make Jaeger. And I got to tell you, since we're talking about it, because it is my favorite, I find it medically, for me, is the best that I've ever found. It takes care of my arthritis. It helps with that insomnia feeling sometimes we all get. It just, disposition of my mood changes. It's just a really good feeling. And I look at it more medical. I used to, back in the day when I first started, was to get high. But no, it's more medical now for me, but I still like the high.
Yeah, and I've smoked the Jaeger that you grow out there, and it is the good cut. And I've had some other cuts that were good, but you can definitely, you can kind of tell if it's the right cut or the wrong cut of Purple Hindu Kush or Jaeger, whatever it is. But the one that tastes like it, I don't know if it's got a little more. It's got a little extra something. It's got a little more depth that you can't quite place, and that's the one that's good. And I will say that when you introduced me to that, to how you grew the plant and working with it a little bit, and to this strain Jaeger, it is one of the best indica strains in my opinion to help with pain management and PTSD simultaneously. Oh, yeah. Now there are other excellent indicas out there. I'm not growing Jaeger. I'm growing Black Domino, which is another one that actually kind of, if you squint, and it kind of does a lot of the same things as Jaeger, but it's a little more narcotic. And that's what I'm going for. But Jaeger is always a good starting place if you're looking for something, or Purple Hindu Kush. if you're looking for something that's not going to completely, end your day, but that will relax you and kind of take you from being so keyed up to a more good place, Purple Hindu Kush or Jaeger is a really good place to start.
And those tones, as he talks about, as I would call them, are earth tones in the flavor. That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, and the good outdoor has it, and the indoor stuff never does.
It does. That's so true.
Well, thank you for being on the Bagseed Chronicles. Would you come back and talk to us about the Galice Grow sometimes?
Definitely.
All right, I'd love to have you. I'll see you next time. That's Rolling Smokes, folks. Thank you for listening to Bagseed Chronicles. You can contact me on Instagram at Uncle Dig or at my email, uncledig4@gmail.com. The producer of the music found on this podcast is Chad DeVilliers. He can be found on YouTube at Ukuleles Are Stupid and on Instagram at Chadwick Enterprises.